everybody. My name's Franny, and I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I'll use it. And I know right now it says 8:05. It's officially 7:30, and I'm off here at 8:30. So you figure it out. I never was that good at it, but they gave me an hour to flap my yob, as they say in Ireland, and so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm actually, CIA, Catholic Irish alcoholic. Do I have to tell you anything else? You watch the play. Okay, well, now I'm going to tell you something. I'm seriously considering not talking tonight. First of all, we were talking about it at dinner. Let's party. Why do you go to meetings anyway? Let me ask you that. Why do you go to meetings? It's not a psychological problem. It's not a psychiatric problem. Why do we sit around in these rooms and pontificate our stories to each other like we're doing something important? I mean, somebody explain it to me. We get up here and I tell you my story, and you nod and you laugh and you cry appropriately, and then we all go home and we feel like we did something. I only know 2 reasons for going to meetings. The first one is because that's where you can snap up a newcomer, because they've been trained by our society now. If you need help, go to an AA meeting. The insurance companies are backing out, so they don't send them to hospitals anymore. So now, get your ass, that's the way they say it. Get your ass to an AA meeting. And so we sit here like crabs waiting for them to come in. And that's why we ask, are there any newcomers? You don't know what you're in for. You raised your hand. Okay, we got you. We got you. And there's a second reason for coming to meetings, because we can get together, we can have fun, and while we're entertaining ourselves, God does the fixing. That's the theory, so. Okay, so I plan on having some fun tonight. I really don't give a damn what you do. I really don't. I don't care. CIA, Catholic Irish alcoholic, the kind of a family that you'd rather not have living next door, but it was a lot of fun to be in the family. I'll tell you a couple of stories just to give you my curriculum vitae, and then we can get on with recovery. One Christmas, do you ever see that intelligence test that they give men about once a year, usually around Christmas time? It looks like a Christmas tree holder, where you got to twist it this way, and then you got to twist it that way. And the whole idea is to stick the tree in it and have the thing stand up straight, well, from every direction. Well, my mother's leaning on one wall. I'm on another wall. My sister Ann is on another wall. My sister Pat's on another wall. So there are 4 of us standing around while my poor alcoholic father, who was always drunk, at least drunk, sometimes insanely drunk, but always at least drunk, is kneeling in the middle of the living room floor trying to put the tree in the holder. And each one of us has this critical view. So, Daddy, it needs to be more over this way. Oh, okay. Annie says, wait. Let it go on that side and bring it over towards me. Okay. And we're looking at each other and we're snickering, and he caught us. So he got really mad, and because he's an Irish Catholic alcoholic, he goes and gets the hammer, pulls the tree out of the holder, takes the tree over to the corner of the room, and nails the sucker to the floor. See, this is my father. This is my father. Frank McKiernan. I mean, this is my dad. And the story is not over. Now we go over to my mother's side of the family. And my mother's mother is an alcoholic, along with my mother's father. And my father's mother and my father's father are alcoholics. And I think we go way back. They're either horse thieves, pirates, or alcohol, maybe all of it. But anyway, so what happens is my grandmother comes over, and she's about as tall as she is wide. She's 5 foot this way, and she's got these big, bright blue, laser blue eyes, you know. And she sees the tree nailed to the floor, and she thinks, this is historically funny. She starts dancing around it, and she passes out in mid-flight. And I don't know how she did it, but she rolled behind the tree. So now we're standing around figuring out how do we get her out of there, you know, because she's stiff where she should be limp, limp where she should be stiff. And we just can't move her, you know, the tree was already about half decorated. So anyway, because we'd been working on it after Daddy nailed it down. We knew enough not to say too much, and he backed off. So my mother said, roll her over the tree. It's okay, so Annie gets in one side and I'm on the other, and anyway, we roll this little round lady right over the tree, and just as we got her over the tree, of course, the tree snaps back, hits the wall, and breaks the rest of the ornaments that weren't broken by rolling her over the tree. And my mother, you want to hear Black Belt Al-Anon? She's standing there and she says, good. She says, this is the year we get to decorate the tree twice. You know, and so that's my family. And background. Married 4 times. First one was normal. God bless that man. He had no idea what he was getting into, and he was normal. And I think he bored me to hell. And the second one was a drinking alcoholic. I had more fun with him, I have to admit that. And the third and the fourth ones, ladies, get this. I found them in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm still married to my 4th husband. He's the keeper. We've been married 30 years now. And yeah, I think we grew up. And he's also my best friend. And I frequently advise him that the reason God put me in his life is so that he would have an opportunity to work a fabulous program. Hey, he's going to lead the meditation tomorrow, so figure it out. After you hear my story, and I'm married to a man who's going to be doing the meditation thing, I sometimes, I don't know whether he's serene or comatose, you know, but he seems to be able to put up with my shit, and I guess that's about as much as I can be grateful for. I didn't have much of a requirement for men when I was drinking. Some requirements, but not many. And the ladies will identify with this. I wanted a guy that was good-looking enough to be arm candy, smart enough to hold a job, and stupid enough to put up with my shit. That was my requirement right there. See, and if I had that, then I had a good deal. And you can find a lot of idiots in this program. You know, you can find somebody just like yourself. And if you're new and you're in here looking for Uncle Daddy, he's here. He's here. And he's willing to tell you anything to get what he wants. And you're willing to tell him anything to get what you want, and maybe I can get into that later. But right now we're still trying to get into sobriety. So now, I drank at Coffee Clutches. I lived out in the valley in North Hollywood after the Korean War when they were opening up the housing for the vets. That's how we got our first house. Lived out there for a while. Everybody had 3.2 kids, and I was bored to tears. And I went to my girlfriend, Shirley Schwartz, and I said, Shirley, what else is there? What is this? Is this all there is? And she said, yeah, what else do you want? You know, and I'm drinking now, and I'm starting to express this real restlessness and this discontent. And I'm not drinking much. I'm just drinking cream sherry. You know, it's the only ladylike thing on the market, I thought. But you can get just as drunk, let me tell you. And so I went up to the church on Roscoe. I figured, good, you know, I was a good Catholic kid. I'll find out. I'll ask the experts, you know. So I went up and I asked the priest, not that I'm starting to get hostile or anything, but I said to the priest, I said, Father, If the only thing you want me to do is just breed thousands of little Catholics, why do you guys bother educating girls? And he looked at me and he said, well, so you won't raise ignorant boys. Oh, yeah. And I thanked him, for his input, and I left. And I really did leave. I left him, I left the church, and what I didn't realize was I wasn't doing anything to them. My measly $5 a week wasn't going to do anything. But what I did was I put myself out on the branch and I cut it off on the wrong side. Because, whether you realize it or not, the church is a social glue. It's part of our society, a place of worship where people can gather, where people can act in union with each other, worshiping a higher power, a superior being, whatever you want to call it, It's a community thing. And see, by walking away from that, I walked away from it all the way. And I'm out there by myself. And by the way, have you ever heard these guys that get up here and say, I'm a recovering alcoholic and a recovering Catholic? Don't you dare laugh at them. Because if you laugh, you're supporting a resentment that hasn't been taken care of. You're enabling a resentment, because that's not cute. It's an expression of some pain that's caused by the fact they still haven't resolved their religion thing, whatever you want to call it. So if somebody says that, just say a prayer for them, because you don't know what they're doing. They don't either. I don't laugh at all when somebody makes comments like that, because I can see the pain. So anyway, we're living out in the valley, and then we buy a house down at the beach, and pretty soon I'm running around down the beach, and I find my kids are running around barefooted and happy as they can be, and everything is sort of like free, and it's the 60s, and oh man, it's like heavy and cool. And that's about all we could say about anything, is heavy or is cool. And my husband was an LA fireman at the time, and he didn't know what the hell we were talking about. And he came to me one time, and I had started hanging around with my hippie friends down on the beach, and what had happened was, after I'd been with them for about 3 or 4 weeks, I went home and I threw away my stockings, and I started going barefooted, threw away my gloves and my little purses and those little pillbox hats or whatever the heck, and I'm running around hairy, happy, and hippie too, and he's standing there looking at this transformation from his convent-raised bride, and he's thinking, what is going on here? And he comes to me and he says, who are those people that are coming around the house? He says, you think they're friends? He says, they're parasites. He says, they're only using us because we live near the beach. And I turned around to him, and having hung with those people for a while, I had learned a new vocabulary. And I turned around to my poor husband and I said, hey, don't go getting heavy on me, okay? And he backed up a little bit, and he didn't say any more, but he didn't approve and I didn't care. Because what had happened was, as an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic before you drink. You're an alcoholic. Because otherwise, if you drank, it's not like you turn into one. It's like maybe you're born with the propensity for it. Tuberculosis is not inherited, but there is a tendency or a physiology that makes you sensitive to the disease and increases your possibility of getting it. Same with diabetes. Nobody's born with diabetes, but you get it. And the same thing with alcoholism. I believe it's inherited. Or at least the tendency to it. My grandparents are alcoholic. My parents are alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. I've been married to 3 alcoholics. I have 4 kids that are all alcoholics and all sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll tell you, the world's a better place because those little bastards cleaned up their act. Really. If I didn't go to jail for what I'd done, I was ready to go to jail for what they did. You know, they were getting up there. And I'm just so grateful to God every day that my kids are sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my two oldest grandkids have already come to meetings. So, you know, I mean, we've got a lineage, and I bet a lot of people out there do too. So anyway, I'm drinking, and my drinking increases, and I'm down on the beach with the friends and learn how to smoke marijuana, and I'm on speed. Now listen, we can get up here and we can talk about abortions, we can talk about divorces, we can talk about some of the most horrendous stuff in the world, and you don't want me to tell you that I was on speed? Forget it. That's part of my story, and you're going to get it. So, anyway, on speed since I was 13 years old. The doctor figured we could burn off a little baby fat. I sailed through high school. First time I drank, I was 6 years old at a party, passed out in a closet. Second time I drank, I was 14 years old. That's the first time I ever saw the Al-Anon face. You know that look? They don't move, they just look. And you're supposed to know what's going on. And all my impulse is, it still is, I have Al-Anon friends, believe it or not. And sometimes they do something and I'll go, what? And when I was 14 years old and I got drunk and threw up all over my bedroom, my mother came in and she's giving me the Al-Anon look, and I'm thinking, what? What do you want? And she just looks at me and she turned around and she walked away. Now, it's an interesting thing that happened there. I had no idea what went on there, but I knew that there was something important, some kind of an interaction there that was like a life situation, even though I was only 14. So when I took my inventory with my sponsor, I told her, I said, Dottie, you know, I don't know where the heck this incident belongs in the inventory, but I wrote it down because somehow or other it's really important and I feel like I need to share it. So I told her the story. And she said, you don't get it today, do you? I said, no. She says, Franny, she says, think about it. She said, your mother is watching your father die of this disease. She walks into your bedroom, and you're sitting there looking and smelling like him, and she knows that her oldest daughter has the disease. She says, that kind of agony is inexpressible. That's the reason they don't say anything. You can't. There's nothing to say. It's just the pain. And I said, I get it. And I realized that amends were more than, gee, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, you know, or amends are not apologies. You know, amend means to make a change in something. An amend is for that guy. Yeah, I feel better, but I better damn well do it well enough to let them feel better. You know, and I realized I had some real unfinished business with my mother because my mother and I were like enemies. She was partial to my two younger sisters, but I was too much like my father. And so anyway, the third time I drank, I got drunk, I got pregnant. The fourth time I drank, I got drunk, I got married. So if you think I had a problem with booze, you said anything to me, I would only tell you, look, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly in the beginning, and I'm just learning how. So get off my case. You know, and I was busy just learning how. And what happened was, because I was so busy just learning how, one time my kids were down on the beach, and it was we were getting ready for a birthday party, and I left the beach early because I was drunk, and my husband came down and got me because he came home from work and found everything total chaos. And I had told him I would get the party ready. He came home from work early. And I left the kids down on the beach and told them to walk home because we only lived about 2.5 blocks from the beach, or 3 blocks from the beach. And by the time we got home, the phone was ringing, and my daughter was saying, she was 9 years old, birthday kid was 8 years old. She was saying, Mom, we don't know what happened. We bought the ice cream. I told the kids, here, take this money, buy ice cream. By the time you walk home, we'll buy a cake and we'll have the party. And what happened was she's saying, Mom, I don't know what happened, but come back down here quick. Buddy was eating his ice cream, and he was sitting on the edge of the pier, and I don't know what happened, Mommy, but he fell over into the water, and we can't find him. And my husband shattered. And I know what it's like to get shocked into absolute cold, operational, sober. And as I remember, I put him in the car, and we went down the beach, and I started running down the beach because I happened to be a hell of a swimmer. And this big, fat Samoan friend of mine grabbed me and flipped me around, pushed me down on the sand and held me there, and leaned over. He says, my God, Franny, don't you find him. And I knelt there and watched until one of my friends came walking out carrying the body of my birthday kid. And I remember being up at the South Bay Hospital in the emergency room, and they wouldn't let us in, but my husband's leaning on that wall, and I'm leaning on this wall, and we got our arms crossed, and we're standing there staring at each other, waiting to find out whether our kid's alive or dead. Well, let me tell you something. In a situation like that, man, people put their arms around each other. Even total strangers will touch each other because that's the way human beings support each other. And my husband, in the last year, he knew that I had nothing left for him. And this man that I used to drive to tears, and I'll tell you, the LA Fire Department doesn't have any wimps, but I was able to make that man cry whenever I wanted. He had nothing for me either. That's why the two of us were standing there looking at each other in that situation. That's what my drinking had done to that family. You know, I do not claim victimhood at any level with my alcoholism, but I have to tell you, I was surrounded by victims because of my alcoholism. Because anything that got between me and the booze was going to get run over. I didn't want to hurt people, but you were in my way. And I needed that booze. I had reached the point where I really needed to stay drunk. And anyway, what happened was he came to me about 2 months later. I never cried because I was running around with bottom feeders, and in the kind of life that I had completely compartmentalized from my family life, I was running with bottom feeders. I was running with people that if they knew that you were hurt or you needed help or that you were short or you were whatever, that you'd get your throat cut and your money took. See, and because of that, because I wanted to survive, I don't know why, but I wanted to survive, I didn't cry. I didn't want anyone seeing me helpless. I didn't want anybody seeing me hurt. I was afraid of what you would do. That's the kind of jungle that I lived in my head as an alcoholic. He came to me, my ex-husband, and he said, Franny, I talked to the priest, I talked to the doctors, I talked to the teachers, I talked to the psychologist, he spent an awful lot of money trying to fix me. He was a good guy. He was trying to get me fixed. And he had me going to every damn counselor that we could find. And I was willing to go for the entertainment value, but that's about it, you know? And he said, I've talked to all of them. They've all told me the same thing, including the priests up at the church, including the nuns. He says, so I'm divorcing you, and I'm taking the kids away from you before you murder another one of my children. And I thought, you know, that really is good thinking. That really is a good idea because, you know, that's it. First of all, I'm the mother. That makes me ultimately responsible. Secondly, I'm the alcoholic. That makes me the scapegoat. In every family, the alcoholic is the scapegoat, and the mother is the ultimate responsible one. And when you have an alcoholic woman who is a mother, she is ultimately responsible, and she is the scapegoat. So there I was, but like I say, I'm not claiming any victimhood, man. I created many more than I ever was. So we got the divorce, and we had to go to court, and I went out and I interviewed lawyers until I found one that smelled like a newcomer. I hired him, I seduced him, and I blackmailed him so that he had to provide false witnesses in a court of law to attest to the fact that, well, I wasn't a very good wife, but she's a heck of a good mother. And I got those kids. And these were people that testified for me that I had never seen before in my life. And I thought I was hip, slick, and cool because I'd pulled that off, man. I was walking around, boy, look at me, man. I got exactly what I wanted. I didn't want anybody else. I didn't love anybody else. I didn't have any feelings for anybody else. But somehow or other, I wanted those kids. And it wasn't that I didn't want my husband to have the kids. It was that somehow or other, there was a connection there with those kids. And I always thought I was hip, slick, and cool because those kids went with me. But you know, you never know the real reason why something happens in your life. Not until years later. And it wasn't until after I had like maybe 20 years of sobriety one day, I was having a cup of coffee with my sponsor. And she said, I know why you got your kids. I said, why? She says, Franny, she said, those kids had to watch you hit your bottom and get back up and get sober and turn into a human being in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, so then it was their turn, they would know where to go. And I went, wow, that just felt like it was right, you know? So like I say, you may have some opinions about why some things happen in your life. You're entitled to your opinion, but hold them lightly. Hold them lightly, because you never know until later on. So anyway, here I am now. I got the kids and I got to get a job. So I found with this keen intellect and this fabulous education that I have, I went out and within a week I had the best job I could have found. I wound up being a barmaid in a beer bar down on Pacific Coast Highway. And I had sawdust on the floor and it was just like a B movie. I loved it, you know? And one day I'm cleaning up this bar and this geek comes slithering in. And he had black eyes, and he was going bald a little bit, but he danced the way I did, and he played pool the way I did. And he had a German accent, even in his sleep. He wasn't German. It was a phony accent. But he was Oklahoma. He was in Anadarko, Oklahoma, half Cherokee. But he had this sexy German accent, which I just loved. And the reason that he had it was because he was a waiter, and European waiters get paid more. So he developed this, I mean, he was as much of a phony as I was. He shot pool the way I did. He was a hustler just like me. And one day he stole a credit card, and he came in and he flashed it, and he said, hey, let's go to Vegas and get married. And my God, when you get an offer like that, what can you say? So I figured, good enough, man. So we went to Las Vegas, and we got married, and within a year, I had another kid. And when that baby was 6 months old, not even 6 months old, that man, who I had carefully chosen as my life partner, is standing in the doorway looking at me with those black eyes saying, I can't take your game, I'm gone. And he walked away. Wait a minute, I'm this much further into my disease, I got another kid, I'm getting tired, you know, I don't want to go back to work. I want to train another one, you know, it's it all. So I figured, I got to save this situation. And I remembered that my mother used to call Alcoholics Anonymous on my father. And these two nicely dressed men would come. Daddy would split just before they got there, but they spent time talking to my mother, and you know, she would cry a little bit, and there was a clean handkerchief, and they would have a cup of tea together, and you know, I needed a little tea and sympathy, damn it, I really did. So I called Alcoholics Anonymous. But based on my arrogance, of course, the call went like this. I told the operator I needed Alcoholics Anonymous, and I couldn't see the dial. I was drunk, always drunk. And she gave me the Manhattan Beach Club. And you know how newcomers love to be helpful? Well, the newcomer answered the phone. Hello, Alcoholics Anonymous. Can I help you? I said, yeah, I want to talk to the boss. He said, okay. And he says, hey, this lady wants to talk to the boss. And the next thing I hear is, give me that phone. No, no, you got it. No, give me. And they're fighting over the damn phone. Finally, somebody got it, and he says, hello. He says, my name's George, and I'm an alcoholic. And he says, our higher power isn't available to discuss anything with you at this moment. But I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm authorized to discuss the recovery. And I thought, I got a vice president. Some keen. So I said yes, and I started telling him my story, and I wasn't on that phone more than 5 minutes. And he knew that, yeah, we were talking about that one out there, but you know what? We got one right here. So he schmoozed with me, and he talked to me about my problems, and he offered to send a car for me. And I have to tell you, it's been a long time since anybody sent a car for my ass, So anyway, I told him, oh, no, you don't send a car for me. See, I wanted him to respect me. And the reason I wanted him to respect me was because he sounded like an okay guy. And you see, I did love my husband, but a girl's got to look out for herself. He could be plan B. So I told him, you tell me where to go and I'll go. So he told me, now, is there an alcoholic in this room that waits until they get to the party to start partying? Come on, you get ready, don't you? A little nip here while you put on the mascara, and a little nip while you're blending the makeup, and another little nip, while you're picking out the wardrobe and fixing the eyelash that fell off. It takes a while to get it together, and you're nipping while you're doing it. You're getting yourself up because you don't want to get there and take off, man. You want to be in full flight. You want to be just, well, all right, maybe you crash sooner, but oh, what an entrance, And that's the way I was. See, I was always ready for any situation. So I'm drinking, and I dropped some speed, and I put on my 79-cent Zoris from Zodi's, and I put on the corduroy camel-colored hip huggers, bell-bottoms that I found out in my backyard after a party. I don't know who owned them, but I washed them, and they fit me, so that made them mine, And I had a man's size 16 and a half shirt that I'd gotten from Goodwill for 10 cents, and it had a button missing, so for propriety, I pinned it from the back, and I had on a camel-colored sweater that I had stolen from Goodwill because I couldn't afford to buy it. I had a broken nose and 2 black eyes, and this was in 1967, and the afro didn't come out until 1975. But I have the kind of a hair, if I don't wash it, it just starts getting woollier and woollier. And I had an afro, and that was all there was to that. And I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous wondering if you were going to live up to my expectations. So there, here we are. And I walked in, and there was this guy named Frank P., and he was leading the meeting. And he was the most horrible man I ever saw in my life. He told this story that was just awful, but it made me laugh. And the first thing I noticed about Alcoholics Anonymous, I am an inappropriate person. Alcoholics are inappropriate people. We're 5 degrees off center. And you sober us up, and what do you got? You got sober, 5 degrees off center, So here I am, You're laughing the same time I am. Hey, now, this is new. I'm used to standing there and watching people to see if they were laughing. When you laugh, I laugh. When you cried, I cried. Because I was a fake. I was like a plastic human being. I had no idea how to do life. And so I didn't know when to do what. And I didn't trust myself. You think I'm kidding? I'm going to give you a test right now. Is there anybody here who has been in a movie theater watching the funniest scene go down on that screen, and you're laughing and you're chortling and you're squirming around and you're ha-ha and you're hee-hee, and all of a sudden you realize yours is the only voice you hear. You are inappropriate, that's all. So he finished up and he says, okay, we have half an hour for questions. And see, I didn't know it, but they had snookered me into coming to the newcomers meeting on Friday night at the Manhattan Beach Club. So I knew that he had some shills. If he said something like that, he had shills ready to ask questions. And I knew that I had to get my whatever it was out there, and I raised my hand as soon as he opened his mouth and said that. I said, yeah, how do I get my old man to stop beating me? And he said, well, I haven't had anybody's old man beat me up since I got sober, which tells you something about his program. And then he says, listen, Indian Jeannie's over here. Jeannie, get up here. Share your experience, strength, and hope with this lady. So Jeannie, Indian Jeannie, bellies up to the podium. She says, my name's Jeannie, and I'm an alcoholic. And any son of a bitch that lays a hand on me now that I'm sober is going to get a knife right in the gut. And I said, hot dog, these people have the answers, you know? I mean, oh, God, I'm saved. And I stayed for that meeting, and I stayed for the 8:30 meeting, and I stayed for the midnight wrist slashers meeting, you know? And oh, man, you had me, you know? You had me at hello. And they finally poured me out of there, you know, at 2 o'clock. And I went home in that big old beater that I was driving, and I walked into my kitchen, and I found the biggest knife that I had. And I washed it, and I polished it, and I put it right on the counter so that when he came home, I could introduce him to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he came home, and I had him up in the corner with the knife right under his chin, and I'm going, blah, 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 I'm a child of God, and blah, 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 and AA, and blah, blah. He doesn't know what the hell's going on, you know. And I pulled the knife back to get a little feedback, and he split. So I figured, okay. And I went to every meeting I could, and you know, one of those old-timers, there's a lot of idiots on this program. You really have to study the book. If you want, newcomers, I don't care if anybody else listens, but there was a bunch of newcomers over here. Let me tell you something. Get the book and read it, because otherwise you don't know whether somebody's telling you bullshit or not. I mean, you know, that's an absolute fact. And we got people in here, they do things like, oh yeah, we make an inventory about people, places, and things. What? Academically, what does it say? People, institutions, and principles. That's a big difference. You know, my sponsor's husband used to say, whoa, we're all out here for money, marbles, and chalk. And he said, where's that in the book? He said, oh, Franny, shut up. You know, he used to get so tired of me. Where's that in the book? Where's that in the book? But anyway, I fell in love with you. I really, really did. But the thing that happened was, you see, I was such a phony. You would tell me your story, and then you would sit there waiting for me to tell you mine, and I wasn't going to tell you my story. I wasn't going to tell you I was the lady that tried to sell myself for a half a pint of scotch in the liquor store, and the guy said, Franny, you're not worth a half a pint. I wasn't going to tell you about the time, many times, I was under the pier with a long stick, keeping the rats away from me because I had to be under the pier because somebody else, some two-legged rats were up on the top of the pier looking for my ass because I'd stolen somebody's stuff and eaten it, stolen it, given it away, sold it, you lost it, you know, whatever you do with other people's stuff. You know, I was a thief. And I wasn't going to tell you any of those things about me. I wasn't going to tell you I was the lady that killed my kid. I couldn't tell you that because I knew that if you really knew my story, that you would have one of your damn committee meetings and you would send two people to say to me, Franny, you know what? Alcoholics Anonymous really has the reputation and fulfills it for the best recovery, for the best return on the effort. If somebody wants to get sober. But you see, honey, we deal with human beings, and you're an animal, so you got to go. See, I knew that would happen because that's what I knew about myself. So I wouldn't tell you my story, and what happened was I stayed sober. I stayed in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, drunk, going to every meeting I could go to for 3 years. I was the club joke. I lost everything. God took care of my kids, that's all I can tell you. Because I didn't have that big car, and I didn't have anything left, and I'm coming to meetings drunk, and I remember one time sitting there, and one lady came by, and she had this newcomer with her, and she went to her, hey, she says, look, she says, you want to end up like that? And she pointed at me, and the girl said, no. She said, you better damn well work the steps. It was like that. I was a good, bad example. What else could I do? And I was there one night after the young people's meeting, and there was this lady. I hated her. And the reason I hated her was because she was always surrounded by people who were laughing, and they were happy, and they were having a good time. And damn it, when you can't have something and you want it so bad, what you do is your feelings turn to hate. When you're so frustrated in wanting something and you can't have it, you will hate it. And that's what happened to me. I hated her because she was so full of joy. And I went up to her after the young people's meeting, and I caught her alone. And her name was Dottie McCafferty. Her husband's name was Dan. They're both dead now. And I said to her, Dottie, I need to talk to you. And she knew who I was, She said, yeah, Franny, what? And I took a deep breath, and I was going to tell her what I thought of her. I was going to tell her what a phony I thought she was, and she's probably on pills and blah, blah, blah. And I opened my mouth, and I took a deep breath, and I said, will you be my sponsor? And she looked at me, and she said, oh, God, I don't know. She said, you're such a loser. And I said the word that saved my life. I hadn't used it in at least 10 years. I looked out into that woman's laser blue eyes, and I said, please. And I didn't want to cry. I wasn't going to cry. You weren't going to see me weep. But she must have felt something, because she said, well, and she put her hand out. One of her lieutenants put a directory into her hand, and she whipped it around, and she started marking it, and she says, these are the meetings I go to, I'll see you there. And I thought, oh my God, I got a sponsor. But I didn't know what to do with her, so I stayed away from her. I mean, I'm an alcoholic. I'm not going to admit I don't know how to do something. And I'm certainly not going to turn my will and my life over to a middle-aged lady from Torrance, for God's sake, So I stayed away from her, and in the meantime, I'll tell you what I did. I did stop drinking, but I didn't stop using speed. And the reason for that was because we had all these old-timers that were standing around saying, and we do not talk about drugs. So I said, fuck you, I won't talk about drugs. So I never told anybody about my drugs. And I sometimes I wonder how many people did we kill in that period. I wonder what we're responsible for sometimes. But anyway, about 3 weeks later, I'm not coming to and passing out anymore, but it's like I wake up and I'm in agony. And I used to get up and have a cup of coffee and drop 2 rolls of bennies, and get going for the day, super efficient, clean my living room with a toothbrush, Well, anyway, 7 o'clock in the morning at least, the phone rings, and I pick it up. Hello, hello, it's her. Now, she told me she didn't want a thing that I had, and she would never call me. She lied. She was there, and she's saying, hello, how are you? And I said, fine. And she says, are you still taking speed? How did she know? And I said, no. She said, when did you quit? I went, this morning. And she said, good. She said, come on over to my house and start hanging over at my house, because you don't know how to stay sober. You don't know how to do sober. And she says, my husband runs a business out of the house, and you can start meeting sober people, and you can start imitating them anyway, or trying. But take a shower before you come over. So I did, and I went over there, and I sat there, and I hid. in the living room under a blanket. I wasn't supposed to be there. And people would come in, they say, "What's that?" She said, "Shh, leave her alone." And I eventually came out from under the blanket. I eventually sat at the kitchen table. I eventually started working the steps. I eventually wound up taking a 4th and 5th step with that woman. I eventually started making amends, and you know what? One sick cookie came up to me and she said, "Franny," I had about 9 months of sobriety. She said, "Franny, I want you to be my sponsor." I said, "Becky, stay there, just stay." And I ran over to my sponsor, because I went to meetings where my sponsor goes to meetings. And I said, "Dottie," I said, "what am I going to do? Becky asked me to be her sponsor." She said, "Franny, you stay one step ahead of her. She'll never know the difference." And so I started sponsoring people when I was 9 months old. You know, and I wound up working the steps, and I wound up getting married twice on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wound up going through bankruptcies in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wound up learning how to walk again only last week. I mean, I've got this sexy cane with me, but I fell. I mean, in the matter of 4 years, I'm bionic. I have a stainless steel here, tungsten in my knee, stainless steel in the hip. What else? I don't know, there's a couple of other things. I do not get through any of those pass-throughs. I just say, I give up as soon as I get there. "Take me, I'm yours," you know. I can't get through this. And they understand. And so I'm okay, bionic, and man, I'm getting around. I'm 75 years old. And you know what? Next week, on February 7th, I'm celebrating 40 years of sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me tell you what I did. I was unemployed and unemployable, and they had to do something with me, so they sent me to school, and I found out I'm a real pig. I collected degrees in sociology, theater, psychology. I wound up getting an MFA in theater, technical design. I wound up making a living with it, you know, and wound up putting a program together. This is the, you know, you don't know, Krishnamurti said it. He said, "You don't know why you were born." He said, "Maybe you were only intended to hold the door for somebody to go through." And I think that that's probably my story, because having gotten all of this education and everything, I wound up putting a program together with my friend Rex, who was also on the program. And I was a teacher at Compton High School, but I was really undercover, because at the same time I was a professor at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Only I was a Compton High School teacher so that we could expose the kids to the university experience. And the way we did it was by bringing the theater training to Compton High School. And in case any of you don't know what it is, Compton High School is the school that you go and study if you're going to make a movie about a bad school. Okay? All right. So I'm teaching down there, and Rex and I have this program, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon, these kids, we load them all up on the buses, take them over to Cal State Dominguez Hills, and they learn to work in the theater as grips, lighting, you know, sound. The kids love the sound, really, they do. And my God, they were going out and getting jobs in the industry. I mean, this is the industry in this town. You know, we don't have any high schools that really, really teach it. But we were doing it. And that was the ulterior motive. What we were really doing was exposing them to the college experience. One time, Javier came to me and he said, "Hey, Miss Franny." I said, "What?" He says, "You know what?" He said, "I went down to get a cup of coffee down at the Commons." They thought they were big time, you know, because they could do that. And he said, "And I saw one of my homies down there buying books." He says, "Man," he says, "if that fool can get through this school, so can I." And I went, "Yes! Oh, God." And, you know, that's what happened. Another time, I'm teaching in the class and I'm writing on the board, and, you know, you can't get off the campus. All the fences go in. So, and we have armored police on the campus grounds, and I'll tell you, the kids can scare them too. But the truth is that it's more reputation than anything else. I think these are the best kids in the world. So what happened was, I'm teaching this class, and we're discussing Roman theater or some such nonsense. And I'm writing on the board, and I hear the shuffling and pushing behind me. And somebody had cut his own class and came and sat in my class, and he was sitting there with his defiant as hell, because that's what you do. If you're going to cut your class, you got to go find another teacher you can harass. So he's in there, and he's going to harass me. And I turned around, and I looked at him, and I went, oh, God, what do I do now? And all of a sudden, I hear this scuffle, and I turn around, and Alex and Javier again are leaning over, and they took this guy, and they just slammed his legs off the desk, and they said to him, hey, man, we don't know what you do in your classes, but we'll tell you this right now. In here, we're professionals. So if you can't act like one, go someplace else. And I went, I'm not saying a thing. And I just kept writing on the board. I just turned around and kept going. And I'll tell you, we had new words. We had integrity. We had respect. We had responsibility. I mean, these are words I learned from you. And I have the opportunity to teach these to kids they call at risk. We're professionals, man. We work, we swim at risk. We live at risk. We know the feeling. We can recognize the pain. We can recognize the hope. We can recognize everything those newcomers come in here looking for. And that's the reason Alcoholics Anonymous is still growing, is because they're out there and they need us and they know where to come. And it's here. I still have a sponsor. Only my friend Betty is my sponsor now because my sponsor died. So I got Betty holding on to me on this side. I sponsor some of the most beautiful and obviously craziest women I've ever met in my life. And they're on this side. So I got my sponsor on this side, and I got those babies on this side. And I'll tell you, you go through life holding on like that, you can't fall down. Thank you.